Hey, I'm Shane Varco, the Executive Director of the Dalgarno Institute. Welcome to our Dalgarno Institute's no-brainer resiliency building sessions. Today's session is a recipe for resilience. Drugs are not part of a successful recipe. So in this session, some basic teaching and learning principles we're going to start with. We're going to really dig down into science. What we're not going to do is try and dumb it down. What we think is one of the biggest mistakes that is made with young people is that we treat them like they're not up to the mark. And I think that's disingenuous and it actually takes away from them. So we're going to look at some science, we're going to dig down into it, but we're also going to try and make it a little bit more accessible. That's the key here. So we're going to look at some basic socialization and learning stages. It's important that we go through that and how the body and how our environments react. But start off with, all of us start life out as a wheelbarrow. We're going to look at that. And also, we humans are not just a lump of clay or just a blueprint. We are in fact a recipe, which you'll see come up on the screen. So what is a wheelbarrow? A wheelbarrow is an empty and powerless vessel that's filled by something or someone else and pushed by something or someone else. So it's really important to know who and what is filling you and pushing, right? Now, at early stages of your life, you don't have a lot of choice over that. You just don't have a lot of choice between the ages of when you're born until you're about 11, 12 when you hit adolescence. That's really your environment is going to be the processes that are going to ensure that wheelbarrow is filled and pushed. Human beings are designed like no other creature. Most animals have a super amount of automated processes built in, but very small capacity to add in and grow beyond a predetermined set of biological factors. With humans, it's pretty much all about learning and learning and more learning. But it's not just learning, it's what you learn, why you learn, and how you learn, and all the factors that surround that are really important. And it's no different with resiliency. Us human beings are not just a blueprint. We're not just a set of predetermined plans that build us. Are we the result of nurture? That's the other question. Nor are we solely a lump of clay that is completely molded by our environments. This was pretty much a consistent debate about how people developed until about 10 years ago. However, that debate has been done and dusted. It is a remarkable combination of both. One of the better ways to look at how we have developed is by using the idea of a recipe. Now what we've done is we've used that model and created the following acrostic: R.E.C.I.P.E. Relationships, environment, conduct, how you behave and why, very important, information, paradigm and practice, in other words, your worldview and how you live it out, and epigenetics. Like all recipes, we human beings have all pretty much the same core ingredients that define us as the human mammal. When some, let's say, core ingredients are missing or added to our DNA, you can see quite a distinct difference. It becomes clear in appearance and function of that particular person, and those things are very difficult to deal with. However, that's not the case for the overwhelming majority of us. We all have the core genetic ingredients for our wheelbarrow cake, if you like, using our euphemisms. But like all recipes, it's also about the following factors: timing of additions, mix of ingredients, tainted ingredients getting in perhaps, length of resting, about little unhelpful spice ups that we think are going to make things work better, time in the oven, and so on. Again, using that recipe analogy, these are things that are really important. Like all cakes, all these processes influence the outcome of the cake you are trying to bake. Now in this particular session, we're going to focus on the final E, epigenetics. We're going to look at the others later on. But in this one, we're going to look at epigenetics, and this is where the science gets really full on. So, in simplest terms, epigenetics, epi on top of, genetics, is best defined as the study of changes in organisms brought about by modification of gene expression rather than by alteration of the genetic code in the form of DNA. We'll explain that as we go along. So your DNA doesn't change. No, it doesn't. It doesn't shift. But the epigenome influences how the DNA is expressed. Very important. So the epigenome consists of nuclear information heritable during cell division that controls development, tissue differentiation, and cellular responsiveness, fancy terms about how your cells develop and how they respond to that developmental process. Epigenetic information is controlled by genome sequence, environmental exposure, and other elements. As such, epigenetics stands at the interface of the genome development and the environmental exposure. And that's a kind of technical way of saying the clay factor, the environment, the nurture component, and the blueprint component come together and work together in this epigenetic space. So the epigenome actually kind of does the mixing, if you like, and helps bring out what's supposed to be happening, or maybe what's not supposed to be happening. Very important. So all cells of the body have essentially the same DNA, as we've said, yet different organs and tissues serve vastly different functions and also retain their identity as their cells divide. So even your cells have got their little identities and they continue to develop as they are, and they're very important. So they're distinct. That's really interesting. This cellular identity is epigenetic information. So that's the information that works. It is the information that goes onto the genes themselves and starts to code them. Exposure to nicotine and other toxins causes substantial epigenetic changes in smokers, for an example, as well as in the cord blood and placenta of fetuses exposed prenatally, affecting genes involved in the normal pulmonary function and cancer. So just in one example, smoking has that impact on the epigenome, which starts to work on the genetic code and how it expresses itself. Very important. Exercise, get this guys, exercise has important effects on the skeletal muscle epigenome, as may trauma in early life. So trauma impacts this, and we're going to discover that more as we go along. Recently, post-traumatic stress disorder has been linked to epigenetic changes prospectively. In other words, trauma actually works on the epigenome, that switching mechanism, and it starts to shift the coding. That's how powerful our environment and experiences can be on shaping who and how we are. So we continue. Understand all the other components of the recipe acrostic that we've set up: relationships, environment, conduct, information, and practice can all also influence the epigenome and how it can shape you. Very important. That's the whole nurture factor coming to bear. So when we stop being wheelbarrows, so someone else is filling us and someone else is pushing us, and we start choosing best practice, not just any practice, for best health and well-being outcomes, we can be more self-determined, and that's really important. That's what this stage of your development as teenagers, as adolescents, is so important. However, if we choose to stay in bad relationships, for example, or poor environments, sometimes we don't get a choice, sometimes we do, and listen to the wrong information and act out poorly, then we reinforce the mess. You get it? It's kind of, we reinforce that process. I've never actually met anyone yet in all my travels and experiences who in principle doesn't want to be a badly manipulated wheelbarrow. But the choices they continue to make often keep them there. And this is where it's really important to develop resiliency on every level. However, one thing that will quickly mess you up and mess with this space is definitely substance use. As research shows, smoking and alcohol are not helpful, and as we'll learn in other sessions, illicit drugs like stimulants, meth, ecstasy, cocaine, opioids, and cannabis, which are depressants, all seriously influence the epigenetic mechanism for the worse. That's really important. Drug use, guys, is messing with your genes. Heads up, guys, it's time for our conversation starter. Okay, number one, as a group or in pairs or with your team or whatever situation you're setting you find yourself, besides drug use, which does bring trauma to the biological resilience, it's going to weaken your resilience biologically, using the recipe model that we've just looked at, what other factors in your life right now are A, undermining your resiliency, detracting from best health and well-being, and why do you think that? B, what things in the recipe model are building your resiliency and adding to a stronger, smarter, healthier and safer you. Number 2, what changes can you make individually and as a group or as a team? And finally, do you need help to make those changes? Very important. And as a group, I want you to discuss that and talk it through. So, how'd you go with that? Again, it's a conversation that can continue. It doesn't have to end there. There's obviously a lot in those 5 basic questions that help you kind of wrestle with some of this stuff so you can see what is working in your life, what isn't, and how best to move forward. That's really important. Heads up, quote of the moment. It's time for our quote of the moment. I love this quote by Christy Nichols. It's very simple and it's very profound. I want you to just sit on it for a minute and think about it. It's this: we repeat what we don't repair. We repeat what we don't repair. Great quote. Now, some of the things we're talking about here with the epigenome, repair takes quite a while, but we can be masters of that repair, as we'll see as we move forward. But it's really important to take stock of what is actually broken or not quite working well in our lives so we can actually make the changes, so we don't repeat the harms, because that's what happens. You start repeating the harms and the epigenome starts to take on those repetitions and encodes that behavior. So that's really important. Okay, we're going to close out this session with our script builder takeaways. Strengthening my bungee rope and adding to my scripting toolkit. Number 1, there is no gene for addiction, really important. But as you have seen, just in part, lifestyle choices can influence gene expression and be passed on from others to you and from you to others. However, new choices, new behaviors, and new environments can have a positive epigenetic impact too. So we can control the way this works. Number 2, you always have choice. Really important, guys. And even as poor choices will undermine your physical, mental, social, and emotional resilience, so good choices can do the opposite. They can build you. Though some decisions can be really tough, they can be, guys. We know how tough it can be. With help from wiser, more experienced and caring others, your good choices can craft you for the better and undo some of the bad developments that have taken place. And finally, number 3, for a takeaway, any substance use during your formative years, particularly when you've hit adolescence up to your full adulthood, between 12 and 28 to 30, only diminishes you, your potential and your resilience. Best practice is not to say yes to drug use.